as soon as I saw the deep dive come out this morning on The Athletic, it definitely almost made me late for work. It was a long read. It was a fascinating read on what went down in Denver last year and what went down in Seattle, according to this report, before Russell Wilson left there. And joining us, one of the three writers for The Athletic who's on the byline of this story, Mike Sando, here on the Rich Eisen Show. Thanks for calling in, Mike.
You know, Rich, it's great to be here. I feel like I grew up listening to you, except you're only 10 months older than me, so I don't know how that would be possible.
Well, I mean,
it's good to be here.
You're a child at heart, Mike. I think that's what that means. What that means. All right, man. So let's just jump right in, because to me, I talked about it at length to start the program, and what I kind of latched on is what happened in Denver, but I know the rest of the sports world is already latched onto the way you started with a nice bang here in your piece that Russell Wilson asked to get both his coach and general manager fired for him to stay in Seattle, and obviously the Seahawks went in the other direction. I give you the floor on your reporting on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, less surprising probably to people that are in Seattle and been watching this play out. But, for years we've known and written about that he and Pete Carroll were at least a little bit sideways, the whole let Russ cook thing, right? He wanted the offense to be more quarterback-centric. Pete, of course, being the longtime defensive coach, run the ball, all of that, was going to play the game how he wanted to. So I think for multiple off seasons recently, there's always been stories or reports where you could feel these things were going on. And then, the timeline really matched up this last off season, meaning a year ago, where, things come to a head at the end of the season. There's the types of talks that you have. There's you could see a stalemate type thing, and Russell making his appeal to ownership. This would have been in February of 2022. So the owner has a decision to make, and the owner had re-upped and extended the head coach Pete Carroll and the GM John Schneider, I believe, within a year or 18 months or so before this. She ends up picking them. This would be in February. So then the combine happens last February, and that's where secretly John Schneider and the GM of the Broncos, George Payton, are kind of laying down the parameters after the decision's been made that the coach and GM are going to stay. And sure enough, then, boom, I think it's March 8th, the story breaks that the trade is happening, and Russ goes on his way to Denver. And then that's where our story picks up with, obviously didn't go as the way anyone expected it would in Denver. Even if you were a Russ skeptic, you thought that it was going to go better than it did in Denver the first year.
No question, and we'll get deeper into that in a second, Mike Sando. But, you quoted a lawyer representing Russ in your story, saying that your reporting of Russ trying to get Carroll and Schneider fired, quote unquote, entirely fabricated. I'm sure you saw Russell Wilson's tweet earlier today calling Pete a father figure and remarking how John believed in him and drafted him as well. He never wanted him fired. So what's your reaction to that?
Yeah. Absolutely. I believe those things are true from Russ about Pete having been a father figure, John Schneider having shown faith in him. I believe that's totally factual. I mean, certainly there are father-son relationships that get sideways at different points. And I think when the book is written eventually on what happened in Seattle, there's going to be chapter on the love and the divorce, right? And so, I think it's understandable that Russell would come out and say those things. And we certainly stand by the reporting. We wouldn't have reported it if we didn't stand by it completely, 110,000%. So we do. And we realize that when things come out and, people, maybe some don't want it to come out, there's going to be different types of reactions or attempts to not have the story come out, to influence it to not come out. All of that is just part of the business. And so, that's all that is, and we stand by it 100%. And that's all there is to say about it. The story speaks for itself. Really.
Sure.
I would say this about our story and our reporting.
Yes, Mike.
I think that there has been a lot of criticism and mockery of Russell Wilson in recent years. His play's declined a little. Even some of his former teammates in Seattle have not supported him as much as they could have. He's been mocked for calling out run or pass on the sideline. He's been mocked for how many bathrooms his house has. He's been mocked for saying he stretched in the aisles. he's become an easy target. And I think notably, our story wasn't about any of that. This was right down the middle reporting on how it ended at the very end in Denver, which explains why it was so. There wasn't Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson having any kind of a pregame conversation that you'd normally expect. This stuff was fresh, and so I think that is a notable part of the story. There's been so much psychological profiling and piling on of Russell Wilson. This wasn't that. We had people on the record talking about the season. There was no one in there making comments disparaging, really, of Russ. It was more evaluating the situation, right? And yeah, it probably was a little too much to have his personal quarterback coach in there. Yeah, in retrospect, the office was probably too much, all of that. So I'd say that about the piece, and then I think it's just fascinating to see what happens now with Sean Payton, because Russell Wilson has played a lot of good ball. Can he come back with Sean Payton? And that's sort of where we left it, with Sean Payton saying all those things, the office, the distractions, we're not having that. It's going to be about football. And so obviously it doesn't feel like it's about football today, but I think very quickly it's going to be about football for Denver with Russell Wilson, with Sean Payton, and probably his best chance in a couple of years to write the narrative of what his career is going to be, because this guy's on a Hall of Fame pace, and now we've got to stumble, but he's still got an opportunity.
Well, again, before we move on to the Denver aspect of it, Mike Sando, the reporting from you and your two other colleagues, Kalen Kaler, did I pronounce it correctly?
Yep.
And Jason Jenks. What can you share with the reporting, the manner in which Russ asked for his coach and general manager to be fired? Was it a direct face-to-face with Jody Allen in an office somewhere, or was it through a representative?
We put it in there as specific as we were comfortable going, based on the considerations of the sourcing. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's what it is, and that's what it says. Okay. But certainly she's the head of ownership.
Mike Sando here on the Rich Eisen Show. Okay, so let's move on to the Denver. The one thing that I could not get past, no, seriously, man, is that the quote in this story, based on the office that Russell Wilson had, and then obviously some other aspects that were unique for a quarterback to have his own people within the building, and the office being on the second floor, that ultimately somebody said that there were too many cooks in the kitchen, and the word cook just jumped off the phone at me, man. All Russ wanted to do was just let him cook, and being allowed to cook in the manner in which he wanted. There were too many cooks. I couldn't get through that. I couldn't get over that.
This is a great example of when you're so close to a story. Like, that's such an obvious thing to notice, but when you're so close in a story, you're always reading it the night before and go, okay, like, what is going to stand out to someone who's not in the middle of it? I actually, as obvious as that is, hadn't thought of that with the cooks in the kitchen. I don't think the person who said it meant that at all. Okay?
Right.
But the interesting thing about this, too, is like the people in Denver don't have the history with Russ. Remember all the, there's almost vitriol from some of the people on the defensive side and the relationship. None of that. We didn't get any of that. I think there's a lot of people still with an open mind of Russ in Denver, but that is hilarious.
Honestly, that just jumped. Too many cooks, said an unnamed coach about it. I'm like, well, that's the word that's been surrounding him, and what was apparently wrong in Seattle, and then apparently what went wrong in Denver in his first year. Because, and also in your story where there was an open door policy in his second floor office, and somebody mentioned, well, the office should have been his locker instead of an actual office. That also hit me too, man. That one.
I got a text today from someone in a different team's front office that said something like, hot take, I think every quarterback should have their office. And I don't necessarily disagree, but I think, what goes along with that, with your own staff in there and open door policy of a player, is probably a bit much. Now, I'll say this. It's all solved if you play great ball, right? I mean, if Russell Wilson had a typical Russell Wilson year this last year, these are all details.
Right. Obviously. So how did it all wind up? I mean, that's the interesting aspect too, is you said at one point management in Denver went to Russ about the office, and then Russ closed up shop and then went back into the locker room, essentially. Was that after Hackett got fired?
I believe that would be the last couple weeks of the season.
So that's it. So then that would be it.
Yeah. So we'll see. I think Hackett is a young coach coming in there, and Russell was such a big name and star with so much juice coming in there that, what was Hackett going to do other than probably acquiesce, maybe overly so? And I think that was a component, too. He had been in Green Bay when Aaron Rodgers had first got there, and there was a little bit of growing pain. Not first got there, but when Matt LaFleur first got there,
right.
And there was some growing pains. So I think, the red carpet was rolled out for Russell, maybe to a fault in the end.
So how do you think it's going to work? So many folks think that Russ, to use a pop culture phrase, jumped the shark last year. But ultimately, in your reporting, the guy who he wanted Seattle to hire, if he got his way, due to your reporting with his coach and general manager, is the guy who's now coaching him. So
I think he's going to be better. I think this was the worst case possible scenario of play. I think the one thing about Russell Wilson is I think he's always worked hard. And so if he's going to work hard, you would think with this offseason, my own personal opinion is I feel like he needs to lose about 10 pounds and just get that quickness back that he had, right? And just really be dialed in that component. And then then Sean Payton do the rest, because Sean Payton always had a run game for Drew Brees, right? Set that up. I think he can still be a good quarterback. I don't think he's going to be – I think we've seen the best of him, though. I don't think he's going to be elite like he was, and I think it's going to be an uphill battle in that division. But I do think he's definitely going to be better than he was this last season, when just almost everything that could go wrong seemed like it did.
And by the way, I mean, you're reporting on what happened at the end in Seattle. For the league then to pop them on the same field week one, I mean, talk about zero chill. I mean, this thing is raw. That had to have been raw. At least when Brady saw Belichick, it was a full season. He had one in the case for himself. It was week 4 in the second year against. Wow. Yeah. And so
I know.
Right.
Everyone was noticing at the time. Look, there's no. We knew there was tension, but there was. Russell Wilson, as we said, was meeting all of these people on the field. You'd think the head coach would be the most natural one, and I think you just sort of. Like almost hope for everybody's legacies that time heals all, right? That in the end, Russell Wilson takes his rightful spot in the Ring of Honor, and that rawness of that, and even whatever's still percolating, maybe goes away with time. And I've seen that. I used to cover the Seahawks. Kenny Easley hated this franchise. He came back into the fold. It took him 15 years, but they come back, and so that's probably the best case scenario for everyone, given all that Russell Wilson did contribute in Seattle, which was a lot.
And they'll never do it because, again, I saw Pete in Munich, and he in the meeting where, things get said in meetings with broadcast teams. I didn't get a hint about Russ and him. It was all how great Geno is and how he felt like, it was time for a new voice, and with Bobby Wagner, too. But for the season to play out the way that it did, where your deep dive on what happened with Russ, again, too many cooks wound up being had, and again, that word leapt off the screen at me. And Geno Smith is the comeback player of the year, even though what is he coming back from, the bench? But I mean, had to have been, and they made the playoffs and threatened the 49ers and that wild card round. That has to be something that they would love to crow about, but don't. Mike.
Yeah, I think it speaks for itself, right? I mean, they don't even have to, because everyone knows. I mean, you couldn't have had a more extreme juxtaposition. I just think longer term, Jody Allen's going to sell the team long term per Paul Allen, the late Paul Allen, the former owner's estate planning. And Pete Carroll's, 70, 71, he's not going to be coaching in the team in 10 years from now. I mean, I don't want to speak for Pete, but I would guess he's probably not. So the time will come is what I mean. The time will come for the people there will be different, and what Russell Wilson contributed to Seattle will be fully appreciated on the merits, which is just playing great ball for a long time, no matter how it ended.
Mike Sando, thanks again. Greatly appreciate it. Let's get you on throughout this non-playing season as conditions warrant. Thanks again, and a fascinating read. So thank you for the time.
To do so. Thank you.
That's Mike Sando, a senior NFL writer of The Athletic. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.